took the mare a few moments to realize she'd stopped walking and was now leaning heavily against a nearby stage wall as she panted, drops of sweat running down her body. Taking a deep breath, she finally regained her composure, taking off to round the last corner separating her from her destination. Almost at once, she spotted the only pony working in the backstage area, Snails. The aquamarine maned colt with the golden coat was oblivious to her presence, preoccupied as he was by the task of untangling several ropes from a knot. Seeing him there gave Cheerilee mixed feelings about it all. On one hand, he was probably one of the least disrespectful pupils in her class. Sure, he was an utter moron, but at least he had the decency not to interrupt her constantly. But on the other hand, his blatant lack of intelligence gave him an innocent demeanor that Cheerilee would have loved to break. But the play could only be so long, and there simply wasn't enough time for her to do the things she really wanted to do. With a sigh, she shook her head, regaining herself to her original plans for him. It'd be over far too fast for her tastes, but at least she had found some way of connecting him to the events of the play, even back here.
"Oh, Snails," she called out sweetly. "I think it's time for you to get into position."
He looked around in confusion.
"Oh, hey, Miss Cheerilee,"
he said dorkily.
The ropes got stuck and I just..."
he began, only to be cut off by Cheerilee as she started pushing him gently in the direction of the opposite of the one she'd come from.
Now, Snails, you know full well what I told you. After the break, you need to hold the rope on the X,"
she said, pronunciating every word extra carefully.
"The rope on the X,"
Snails echoed. Just a few meters ahead, some pony had indeed chalked a big white X on the stage floor, and a long, sturdy rope hung down from the ceiling right above it. Snails went to stand on the mark without any hesitation, and took the end of the rope between his teeth. Cheerilee nodded approvingly at him, and his chest swelled up with pride. It almost made Cheerilee feel bad. Almost, but not quite. She put her ear against the thick wall separating the stage from the backstage area, trying to listen in on the scene. She could barely make out two ponies talking to each other, and even though she couldn't understand what they were saying, it did give her a rough idea of the current situation on stage. For the upteenth time, she had to chastise herself for drawing out her fun too long and reveling in the aftermath of it, as she realized she only got there in the nick of time. If she kept that up, she'd mess up sooner or later, and she knew it. She made a mental note not to adhere to her schedule more rigorously from then on out, comforted by the fact that she'd gotten almost halfway through the show without any major incidents. She closed her eyes as she listened to the sounds reaching her through the wall, her imagination creating the scene inside her head. She saw Sweetie Belle and Apple Bloom quarrel about what they should do next. She saw the king shoot down every single idea her last remaining knight came up with, and she saw her finally fulminating that enough was enough, that she indeed a good night's rest to mull it all over. She witnessed the king curse the sun for still being so high in the sky, felt her reach for a rope that disappeared somewhere in the darkness above the stage, watched her pull it down with all her might, and then the sun fell from the sky. As it descended, the technician pony in the box above the turbines doused most of the lights, while the orchestra started playing loudly. The king's lament had begun. Cheerilee's eyes flew open as soon as she heard the first notes, her gaze shooting up instantly. The world seemed to slow down to a crawl as the schoolteacher saw a huge spotlight, the sun, come crashing down from the ceiling exactly above the eggs she had planted. Snails had spotted it as well, and he tugged on the rope in his mouth desperately, wondering why it didn't work that time, why it didn't allow him to gently let the spotlight down like it had before. His only conscious thought concerned not letting his teacher, and everybody else, down during those crucial moments. So he kept on trying the rope, but it wouldn't budge, and the spotlight did not slow down. Moments before impact, both Cheerilee and Snails lowered their gazes and looked each other in the eye. Cheerilee mouthed the word, "goodbye," and broke into a smile, but the actual word itself was lost in the rush of the music. Snails just stared at her in confusion. Why? Why was she smiling? Why was she just standing there? Why wasn't she... The spotlight crashed down onto the colt, small pieces of glass scattering over the floor and flying off into the air as the music hit a crescendo. To Cheerilee, it looked like a slow-motion explosion of tiny, shiny crystals erupted around the younger pony, temporarily hiding him from her eyes. The combination of the orchestral music and the setting cloud of tiny glass splinters was simply too much for Cheerilee's romantic soul to bear, and she shed a single tear at the beauty of it all. The world finally kicked back into usual gear as the tiny pieces of glass clattered onto the floor and the orchestra stopped playing. Finally, she could admire the fruits of her labor in the form of Snail's broken body laying underneath the huge spotlight, most of it having been crushed from the middle down. Even his upper torso had hundreds of tiny cuts and lacerations all over it, although he didn't get hit directly by the falling object there. His normally golden coat was soaked red in many places already. Cheerilee took a few steps forward to admire the way a small pool of blood flowed between the tiny fragments of glass on the floor, the wannabe crystals crunching noisily under her hooves. As she got closer to the spotlight, she started noticing the smell of burned flesh impregnating the air, and it seemed to get warmer with every step she took as well. She walked around to the other side of the spotlight and finally realized why. Cheerilee had known the spotlights got very hot, of course, but she hadn't expected the thing to retain the heat quite that long. Snail's entire backside was covered in blisters, singed flesh, and smoldering fur, and she noticed it was still spreading. With a high-pitched, hissing sound, a patch of fur on Snail's back suddenly ignited, the small flame dancing around playfully on the pony's back. Cheerilee looked at it with fascination, but did not dare get any closer. She was already uncomfortably warm where she was standing, a meter or two away. The teacher pony gasped in shock as Snails groaned and slowly opened an eye, looking around shakily, clearly still dazed.
Miss Cheerilee, I can't feel my legs. And what smells?
He said as he craned his neck around to look over his shoulder. He immediately saw the small but growing flame, and even he was smart enough to link it to the horrid smell that was assailing his nostrils.
Fire! Fire! Miss Cheerilee, fire!
He yelled as he tried to crawl away, thrashing his upper body around wildly in an effort to get loose. Because he was trapped underneath the spotlight and with his hind legs out of order, the situation was hopeless from the outset. All he did with his erratic movements was fan the flames on even more. In a matter of seconds, various little flames were dancing around his body, and he screamed as their hot tongues licked his tender flesh.
More blisters and boils appeared around the flames as they consumed everything within reach. The fire grew and grew, pulling more and more of his body into its deadly embrace, eager to feast now that his head had been set loose upon him. The golden pony cried out as the ember tendrils quickly spread across to his face, his vision immediately taken up almost entirely by the voracious flames. The pain was excruciating, as if thousands of little critters were gnawing on him with hungering teeth, and all the water had been drawn from his body at the same time. Cheerilee watched on in awe as the spectacle unfolded before her eyes. She hadn't expected a show at this stage of her plan, but there it was, and it was breathtaking. She noted how several flames were already burning out, leaving his body charred black, cracks and fissures appearing in his dried-out flesh as snails desperately thrashed about. He started hitting himself in the face with his hooves, trying his best to put out the flames burning there. Every hit left deep imprints in his weakened, boiled meat, but the flames would not be conquered. At most, they retreated for a single second, only to come back with a vengeance. Snails screamed in agony once again, and panted with the effort as his life flashed before his eyes. Loss of blood competing with the fire to see which one of them could kill him first. In the end, the fire won out as superheated air invaded the colt's lungs, singeing him on the inside as his screams stopped. He wheezed for air, every breath like 1,000 daggers forced down his throat. His vision started to get blurry and black spots sprang up everywhere. Suddenly, by chance, the flames moved away for a moment, and he could barely make out Cheerilee, just standing there, watching, and she was laughing. The colt let out a dry, rasping sound as the flames blew back into his face, his eyes giving out as the orange tongues dug in. If he had any strength left, he might have screamed the moment his eyes popped and melted away, flames immediately claiming his now empty eye sockets for themselves and licking the inside of his skull. But he was already too far gone. Cheerilee coughed and sneezed a few times. The smell had gotten too much even for her tastes. But she continued watching as the lifeless husk formerly known as snails burned out. A little voice in the back of her head asked her if she ought to find some water in case anything else caught on fire, but she was too mesmerized by the flames to care at the point. She finally snapped out of her fascination when the last of the flames died, leaving only a blackened form roughly reminiscent of a pony in its wake. Panic hit her like a truck when she realized what she had just done. She drifted from her schedule mere moments after she promised herself not to do just that. But she mentally hit herself over the head as she raked her brain, trying to remember where she was supposed to have gone instead of staring at the pretty fire. And the answer calmed her down quite a bit. She only has to skip leaving Snip's costume for the final stage, which was different from the one he'd been wearing, in the right place for him. She shrugged. He could probably find it himself that one time. He knew where she kept it. It wouldn't be a problem. She laughed softly as she went down some stairs to get beneath the stage, and then headed off for the promised corner. For a moment there, she thought she'd really messed up, but there were only 3 left to go now, and she was still firmly in control. Nothing would go wrong tonight. Nothing at all. Hi everyone,
JC here, and I'm so sorry for the delay of this video. I recently got very sick with this terrible cough that would not go away, and I couldn't speak a couple sentences without having to basically cough out my lungs. And some other personal issues that have popped up in my life, but here we are, part 6 of Cheerilee's Garden, and hopefully I can get more videos done soon. Again, I'm really sorry for having to delay this video. I also wanted to ask everyone, all my subscribers and whatnot, if with the My Little Pony Grimdark fics and stuff, should I do creepypastas as well? You know, like some of the more famous ones, and then ever so slowly dig more into the internet to find even more, you know. Would that be a good idea, or would you rather just me to stick to ponies? So that's about it, and tune in till next time, I guess. Bye!